So it's called Paths Through Academia, where I was planning to sort of, I know we talked about the application process, but I wanted to talk a little bit more about what might be some things you guys could do more to prepare before you apply for grad school while you're still in college and also after college, and maybe talk a little bit about like even after the PhD, like what do career paths look like, which I know some of this might be recap from things you've heard earlier in the sessions or from your mentors. So if you have more questions or like think you heard conflicting advice and would like to just ask, like please like raise your hand or just jump in and we can make this like a discussion at any point. Okay, so let's see. So my plan, yeah, like I said, we're going to talk a little bit about things you could do during your final years of college and beyond. So I'm going to refer to that as post-bacc throughout this session. So research experience that you can get, how to find post-bacc opportunities and what to expect from them. A little brief overview of some possible careers after the PhD. If we have time, I'd like to try to do a little bit of reflection on some of like your skills, values, and interests that you're going to develop through the PhD and that are going to kind of like carry you throughout this whole journey. Maybe some broader takeaways, and yeah, please jump in with questions at any point. Okay, so yeah, like we've kind of talked a lot about how you could go directly from college to the PhD, but we also kind of brought up here and there that we really encourage at least considering the idea of pursuing these post-bacc opportunities in between college and the PhD. So this is going to be usually a 1 or 2 year full-time research assistant position. I'll talk a little more about it later, but they can go by many names. Like there's a lot of different job postings out there. So like it could be a research assistant, it could be a clinical coordinator, a lab manager. All of those are basically the same kind of thing. We also mentioned that you could do a master's in between, but that I would think carefully about doing that for a variety of reasons. Some of them being that you usually do have to pay to do a master's, while a research assistant position would mean you would be paid for a few years. And also you would just really learn some extremely valuable skills by like being on the job, whereas masters might vary in terms of like maybe you'll just be doing more coursework, that kind of thing. Okay. So I'm going to first talk a little bit about stuff you could still do while you guys are in college, since I think many of you are still in college. So you could certainly join a lab at your undergrad institution, or if you're not able to find the right opportunities there, or if your university doesn't have a lot of like research going on, you could also look at neighboring institutions. There might be virtual opportunities too. But basically there's like a wide variety of options there. You might be able to do it for course credit, you might be able to do work study. You can maybe do volunteering too, but I would really encourage you to like see if you can like get something in return for doing that work. Like there may be funding available to help assist you if you need it, so I would definitely ask about that. And there's usually some kind of like umbrella research organization for undergrads that can kind of help guide you through finding those options and like finding the funding opportunities. So like here at Penn, we have something called CURF, which is an undergrad like umbrella research organization, and we also have organizations like MindCore that are really helpful. And then if you're able to, I would really suggest trying to do some kind of independent project. So it doesn't have to be an honors thesis, but that could be like really helpful. Basically, it's like really really promising for admissions committees to see that you've really like had a stab at your own like going through the entire research process, going from like forming some kind of research question, maybe collecting the data, and also just like having the chance to do some analysis and interpretation of the data. So while it's still helpful to do things like helping to collect data in the lab, it might be really nice to be able to actually like ask some of your own questions. And potentially this could even lead to like participation in some like academic conferences. So that would mean like giving a poster presentation at some kind of conference, which could be like a national conference or like a local one. And maybe even in some cases, like you could help out with a manuscript, although that would probably require talking more with your advisor about the options there. Okay. Another thing you can do is there's like many summer research programs out there that would be like a 10-week experience during the summer that would be full-time. Often there's a stipend there to help you like live in the city and do research. Some examples are, Heather already brought up MindCore's undergraduate summer fellowship program that we have here. There's a lot of like NSF-sponsored research, so you can look for, they're called REUs. And there's also just actually like a lot of people like compiling all this information. So I'm going to share these slides with you guys because I've included the links, but there's some like people have put together lots of lists of like in different subfields of where to find these programs. So here are some examples from neuroscience and cognitive neuroscience. I'm sure there's similar ones in psychology. Sorry, I probably should have said that I come from a psychology/neuroscience background, so that's kind of going to be the flavor of a lot of the examples I give here, but I think it should be pretty applicable, like applicable things in other subfields as well. Yeah, and just be careful about deadlines and any constraints. Like some of these programs maybe will only take you, or may not take you if you're a senior, for example, because they want people who are like currently in undergrad. I don't know how much you guys have thought about this kind of thing, but there's some skills you can start developing right now that might, I think Angela brought this up earlier, like that you, since you have like access to coursework and like, I mean, I know you already have your own coursework that you're doing for your majors, but there are some like practical skills that might really help you depending on what kind of field you want to go into. So I actually think that a main reason I got my post-bacc job after undergrad was because I had taken a course in Python, so that kind of stood out to the person who was hiring me, and they were like, oh, she has some programming experience, let's talk to her. Not that every like research opportunity requires programming, but there's a lot of these kind of like concrete skills that are maybe not as people who are hiring won't always see that in resumes, so that might stand out to them. So things like programming or any kinds of statistics are always good. R is a good tool to try to like get some familiarity with, so that's a software tool for doing stats and visualization. There's so many like free online courses as well if it's not something you want to commit to, like taking an actual course at your undergrad. You could maybe like look into learning more about research methods. There's always, you can always improve your writing and like communicating about science. These are all things that might be like helpful to be able to include on your resume. Another thing is like nowadays there's so much like open data that you might be able to even like start thinking about some of your own like research questions just through like publicly available stuff. So if you're like in a position where you're not able to get a lot of like direct like a research position, you might be able to see a lot of like data sets or tutorials online that you could explore. Does anyone have any like questions or thoughts so far before I keep going? All good?
I just would add one comment, which is with the skill development, the things that are jumping out at me there are the things that the professors like don't know how to do or don't want to do, but still have to do. And so they like programming because Angela said herself, she doesn't know how to do it. And so if there's something that you can sort of bring that they can't do, they're old, they don't want to learn that stuff. The other piece, particularly on the psychology side, is that the NSF requires faculty to do outreach for the most part, and a lot of them don't want to do it. And so if you can show that you've had this interest and you've done some science outreach, they're completely going to, I mean, all of the science outreach basically here is done by trainees in the lab. And so they're going to, I mean, science outreach is also kind of fun. And so those are actual things that they would be excited about, you bringing that kind of experience to their lab.
Right. And I mean, it's also like fine if you're not able, I know there's so many things you guys need to be doing now that if you're not able to get a lot of experience with this, like often you can learn these things on the job. It's just that it might give you a bit of a leg up or might help you like hit the ground running a little bit more, because then your PI might be able to be like, oh, you've done some R stuff, like can you try doing this task? And you might like, that might set you up to get to try some more interesting things while you're in the lab. Okay, so factors to consider. Yeah, so if you did decide to go directly from college to PhD, like just be aware that that would mean you would be like going through the application cycle during your senior year. So as you're finishing up other things for college, and those would be due in just usually around December, which I think you guys talked about like yesterday, the full application process. For this like more like post-bacc route that I've been talking about, just a few thoughts. So usually what happens is they appear online often like early mid-spring with like start dates sometime in the summer, but also it's like there is a lot of flexibility there. There's always like job postings appearing like at all times of the year, so I wouldn't feel worried if you're not able to like immediately start looking like in January or anything like that. I got my position I think in like April or May of my senior year, which I know can be a little bit scary if you're like, I'm about to graduate, like I don't know what's happening next. But these positions are always like coming out because PIs often don't know exactly when they'll have funding or like when they'll have availability for a new position. They usually last 1 to 2 years, or it could be 3 years. I think I would suggest trying to do 2 years over 1 year. I know there's like often like you want to like keep going and like immediately go to the PhD as soon as you can, but if you think about it, if you apply, like if you only do 1 year, that would mean you would be applying after only having like 6 months of experience at this place, and you might not have as much to add as if you were doing a full 2 years and you got to have like 1.5 years of experience. And like I mentioned, there's a bunch of different job titles, but they all generally refer to the same thing. So here's some, like clinical research coordinator, technical assistant, lab manager, research fellow. They all kind of generally refer to the same sort of position. So some are more like 9 to 5 jobs, and others are more like structured research training programs. So one example that might be particularly relevant for anyone who's interested in clinical stuff is the NIH ERDA program, which has, I mean, it's a similar idea, but I think it has some more structure in terms of like other programming that you can, like other like talks that you can go to, stuff like that. But all of these are kind of like, they implicitly understand that you are pursuing this job as a stepping stone to grad school. So it's not thought of as like a long-term job or anything like that. Although you do want to like look at the job postings and see what they're expecting, because there are some like research tech jobs where it's not really meant to be a stepping stone. It's more like an actual like, you know, just like cleaning beakers, like doing, I don't know, like managing lab stuff that's not really going to help you with a PhD. So I would be careful to make sure it looks like a program that's, or a job that's actually going to help you develop the kinds of skills that you want to develop. But yeah, I'm going to start talking now a little bit more about the post-bacc experience specifically, but I did want to like say like, but obviously you all know yourselves the best. Like if you have like your own personal reasons for wanting to go straight to the PhD after college, like that is understandable, of course, but I just wanted to highlight some of the things for taking more of a gap year approach. Okay. So yeah, as we've kind of been talking a lot about, some of the reasons to consider doing such a position include you get to learn more about the field and like kind of get more of a chance to hone your research interests. You might feel more confident that you really want to apply to a PhD. Like it is totally fine to do the post-bacc and decide afterwards that you don't want to do the PhD after all because it isn't what you expected. Our lab manager actually has like decided that she didn't want to do research but found something else that she was really passionate about, like social work, and that was like completely right for her. Yeah, obviously you'll get to gain research experience, which will make your application more competitive. You'll have a chance to gain more of these long-term mentors that we've been talking a lot about, like an advisor who can help you with your application materials or like share like inside knowledge about the field or potential labs that you might want to join. And this is like more of a personal thing, but also you get a little chance to catch your breath. I mean, you'll have just finished college, which is like 4 grueling years, I'm sure. And it's just nice to be able to have a chance to take a step back. You're gonna earn some money. You'll get to like experience a working environment. I mean, it's like an academic environment still, but it's still a working environment. Like you'll get to say like, I'm working 40 hours and then that's it. I'm gonna spend time exploring the city. Like I think there's something nice about getting a chance to take a pause and like develop some of those life skills, all of that. So that's another thing that you might want to think about, is like something you might want to pursue like after college. Okay. So there's a lot of information on this slide. So there's like, I think someone mentioned that there's no really like centralized location, unfortunately, for these job postings, which is true. But there are a lot of sites that do try to like curate this, that you can basically just keep tabs on and keep looking for any like new postings that show up. And like I said, this would probably usually happen in the spring, but it's kind of like they'll pop up at any time. So a big one is like Psychology Job Wiki, which that one actually also is really good for looking at like postdoc positions and faculty positions. So if you're interested in learning more about like what those kinds of jobs look like, there's a lot of postings there. There's stuff that's specific to like clinical psych, internship opportunities. Department websites will often have like curated lists where someone at the department is just frequently updating postings. There's listservs that you can join. Obviously you can go to like HR sites or actual job sites. I like the higher ed jobs one because I think it's like, it usually has more of these like specific research post-bacc positions rather than like more general kinds of jobs. Like usually there's more jobs that are kind of targeted to the like grad school related kind of path. So that's nice, and you would just use these kinds of like keywords here. And yeah, it might be like more of a slower process, but if you want to look at the websites of like specific professors or labs you're interested in, you can also do that. This is an interesting one that someone told me about that I hadn't tried, but you could also like go to this website and just see what labs have funding currently, and that might make it more likely that they are going to be interested in hiring someone. And this is kind of related to something I'll say on the next slide. Yeah, so there's what I just talked about are basically like websites of information, but another big way is always going to be like using your network or social media, those kinds of things. So one thing you can do is like if you're in a lab now, you can tell them that you're looking for these jobs, and they can probably help like keep a lookout for any new job postings that they think you might be interested in. But it's possible to just send a lot of just cold emails out to people you're interested in. Like, you certainly don't have to wait for a job posting to appear in order to like express interest to faculty and ask them if they're hiring or if they will be hiring soon in the future. So 2 of our lab managers got their job that way. They just emailed my advisor and said they love her work and were curious about whether she's going to be hiring a lab manager soon. And she just hadn't had a chance yet to put out the job posting, but she had new funding, and she was like, yes, I am looking for someone, let's talk more. Or if like it wasn't the right timing, like she still like knows about them, and maybe it might even be like that name recognition could help even like if you were interested in applying for like grad school later on. Yeah, so I know I'm personally always really scared to send these emails. I'm like, why should I? Like they might, I don't know, not like to hear from me out of the blue, and like why would they be looking for, if they don't have a posting out there, they must not be looking for anyone. But absolutely you should like look up that website that I showed you on the previous slide about like who has funding and see if there's any like interesting projects going on. So the email also, I don't know if you guys know, but it can be like pretty brief but personal, like show to some extent that you've looked into their work. Often you want to include your resume, which you can get feedback from like your individual mentors that you guys met this weekend, if you would like. Maybe we don't have to do this, but here's just like kind of an example of what that can look like. Like it can be like, it doesn't have to be like super extensive, but just briefly introducing yourself, maybe saying any relevant research experience you've had, something about your interest in their topic and your CV or resume, and just say like you'd be interested in potentially working with them. You could probably send like a similar kind of email for grad programs as well. Yeah.
So what if you did it like the other way around? Like you apply for PhD programs this cycle, and then if you don't get into any, you can cold email professors that you apply to and be like, do you have any openings for a post-bacc position?
I think that's perfectly fine. At that point, I'm sure they probably like have some sense of who you are, so it wouldn't even be a cold email at that point. But I think it's certainly always fine to like express interest. Like professors like love to hear from people who like really like their ideas and work. So I think that's, and I mean the worst they can say is like, sorry, I'm not hiring, which is never anything personal. Like sometimes it's just timing, like they've already hired someone or something like that. So I think it doesn't hurt to ask. Yeah.
Would you recommend attaching your
for the post-bacc stage, probably they're only like expecting a resume. If you have a CV that you feel like, yeah, I was gonna maybe talk a little bit more about the difference between those two, but I think for the post-bacc stage, a resume is totally fine in what they expect. I don't remember if I have a separate slide for this. No. Okay, but a CV is basically a longer resume, and it's kind of like frequently used in like psychology and neuroscience areas, but a resume will be like 1 or 2 pages where you'll like list out your experience, whereas a CV will just have more pages for stuff like posters you've done or publications you've had, like spelling out more of your research skills, stuff like honors and awards, or professional societies that you're affiliated with. But as you can maybe kind of tell, like that sounds like something that would be more appropriate for like a grad student who's had a chance to really like develop all those skills. So I think for post-bacc jobs, they're not really expecting that, and like a resume that shows like all of your relevant experiences, research or otherwise, like that's totally fine. So a resume, I think, is good. Yeah. Did someone else have a, yeah?
Would this email formats be good for hiring jobs as well?
I think it would be good for like any kind of like research related like job, yeah. I mean, you don't have to follow this template exactly, but you know, sort of a brief introduction, where you're coming from, any relevant research you've done, and maybe something a little more personal to that particular lab, like saying something about why you like their work, or like something you'd really be interested in, and yeah. But I think it's like fine to be like pretty to the point, and like you don't have to like draft a whole letter explaining why you love their work. It's more, professors are also busy, so it's helpful to just shoot like a pretty straightforward email. Yeah, and you can also ask mentors to like double check your emails if you're nervous about sending something. I think they'd be happy to read over them. Okay. Another big place that I would actually recommend that I think Sibel brought up the other day is academic Twitter, which I avoided for a long time because I was like, I'm not going to go on Twitter, I'm not going to say anything. And I still don't really say anything, but I think it's been kind of helpful to just follow a lot of people that you're interested in, because it's like a really like quick way to get updates on like the most cutting edge stuff that they're thinking about. And also you'll see all these like job postings. Like they'll often, if the advisor is like on social media, they'll usually post their job postings there. People will share like relevant or related stuff. So I think it's a good way to kind of get a very like curated feed of like research work that you're potentially going to be interested in. And you don't have to like have a Twitter presence necessarily. Like you don't have to, I know there's some like sense of people having like a very like crafted like Twitter page where they say a lot of interesting things, but I just follow people to get the information, and I think that's totally fine. So some like helpful like hashtags or accounts are going to be like academic Twitter, academic chatter, where people will kind of say stuff that's relevant to grad school. It's also kind of an interesting way to get maybe a more candid peek into what grad students are currently thinking about. And it's also a really good way to get like immediate information on new papers, and they'll often like give like brief summaries of the results. So it's like really nice for keeping updated on the literature as well. And then there's just a lot of like people out there. I also wanted to put this up because I wanted to like highlight that there are a lot of people who are really passionate about mentoring and sharing resources. There's a lot of accounts that are just purely dedicated to like sharing resources, talking about kind of this hidden curricula that are hard to know about, compiling job postings. There's like so many of them, and it's so nice to see. So I think I would suggest looking into those.
There's 2 things I would add that's helpful here. One is a lot of times when there's a scandal at an institution, it shows up on Twitter first. And so if there's like a sexual harassment problem within, this has happened at 2 prominent schools in the last 5 years, where basically their psychology departments have been kind of wiped out. That often will show up on Twitter. That can be hard to sort of discern, but you know, it shows up there before it shows up in the New York Times. But the other place that can be really good is that I would say Black faculty are very vocal on Twitter. And so you'll find at institutions like Penn, we don't have a lot of Black faculty. but they're very communal on Twitter and are very supportive. And so it can be really nice to be part of like this community that exists there that can be hard to find within the institutions. And so there's some like, and Black and Neuro is a really great one to follow. And for any other kind of group as well, you'll find the Latino students, and then they'll just sort of talk about issues and like some of the problems that they face and how to talk about them, which I think can be really helpful.
It's currently disabled in higher ed month. So
Yeah, I saw that. I'm actually at the end of the presentation. I have some more like examples of these like communities that I've been following or have seen that I'll show at the end. But I saw that on Twitter. And yeah, it's also another nice thing about Twitter is like these days people are working really hard to kind of like amplify student voices or like people of color's voices and saying like, hey, like I'm like doing this really cool work. You should like follow me and it's just like been so like inspiring to see like all these students like really excited about their work. And I think that's like been just so awesome to see.
Academic Twitter is pretty nice.
It's really nice.
It's
Yeah,
like
there's some.
Yeah, I mean, but for the like, it seems nicer. I don't follow really anything else, so I don't get much of it. But it's a pretty positive. If you follow like the right people, it can be like a pretty positive experience.
Yeah, I feel like it's helped me a lot. I still don't really post though, so that part's fine. Yeah. Okay. I think you guys can kind of guess these things, but when you apply, you can check the job posting for the expected and preferred qualifications. Don't like not apply because you feel like you don't meet every single qualification. Like many of these postbacs are designed for people who are straight out of undergrad. Often they'll say like it would be nice if you had XYZ skills, but many people don't, and it's totally fine, and it's sort of expected. So I would definitely apply if you're interested. Oh yeah, here's the resume or CV thing, but I think a resume will probably be the most common, and they'll usually say in the job posting what they're looking for. There will probably be an interview if they're interested in your resume. In my experience, it's been pretty like fairly chill, like maybe like a 30-minute phone interview, something like that, where usually they're just telling you more about what the job would be like and like what their research is, and maybe hear a little bit more about your experiences. Some of them might ask a little bit more about your particular skills to see if it would be a good fit. And yes, you should also like ask your peers and mentors for advice, feedback, practice for interviews. Sometimes people will share samples of things they've done. If any of you want to ask me for like any of my like things I've sent out before, I'm like more than happy to forward that along as well.
I just have a quick question about
Yeah.
resumes specifically. I feel like I always struggle with knowing what to include in it still, even to this day. So like when
Yeah.
I'm applying to like a research thing, how do you go about like, for example, job experience, but if it's not relevant to like research, but kind of just like general skills training, like serving, for example, at a restaurant or something like that, do you not need to include things like that in your resume and just be specific?
I think you don't necessarily have to only put research, but you would want to like highlight why the skills you developed in that job are potentially really helpful. Like an example from my own area is that we work with kids and families, so like a big component of that is going to be being comfortable with children, like being like able to navigate like interacting with the broader community. So like speaking skills are always good. So stuff like that is like going to be useful in a research setting. So I wouldn't discount anything that's not like just like a technical skill or something like that. But I do think you want to make it clear like in the resume like why you think it's relevant. You know, like the typical advice of using like active voice of like particular skills. Yeah, but I think those could be really helpful. Cool. Any other questions about anything? I'll keep going. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I noticed some job postings put like resume/CV. Should we send both or one? And which one?
Oh, I think they just mean, they don't mean both. They mean you can send one or the other. I think it probably just means like if you already had a CV, like go ahead and send that, because that's usually what we send around for like grad students and stuff. So it's like common to see in the academic world, but I think it's fine to send a regular resume if that's like what you've polished up and worked on. I mean, if you're like continuing in academia, it could be nice to start a CV to just have that going. And like, yeah, you can see examples online. I can share mine as well. But I think a resume would be fine in that case. You don't have to send both because they usually have like overlapping information. Okay. We don't have to spend much time on this, but just like, basically there's any kind of like whole array of responsibilities you might be in charge of. So often it's going to be stuff like working with participants, or if you're in like more of a wet lab, doing those procedures, administering assessments. You might get a chance to kind of manage and like collect and code up data, maybe even like statistical analyses if you feel comfortable with that, and you could end up assisting with like posters, talks, manuscripts. I did a 2-year post-bacc at MIT. It was called a technical assistant position. So I did a lot of stuff like working with participants, collecting MRI data, and I also learned like basically everything I needed to know for MRI analysis that I use now in my PhD. So I think it can be really like choose your own adventure, but there's just such a range of possible things you might be involved in. If you're at like the interview stage, it might be helpful to talk, if you get a chance to maybe some of the lab members or the previous outgoing like research assistant to see like what their day-to-day looked like, or like what kinds of options were available to them to get more of a sense. And yeah, maybe I would recommend like considering like what are the job responsibilities, and is it likely that you'll get something out of the job that you think will be beneficial to you for grad school. Like kind of like what I mentioned before, like there might be some positions out there that look like they're like a research assistant job, but maybe they're more just like a technician, like you're like cleaning up samples kind of stuff, and you want to get a sense of like there might be options for you to help out with independent projects or posters, things like that. It's nice to get a sense of that, like if you'll have a chance to do independent work. Okay, so is there anything about like the post-bacc section before I like do the like brief dive into like after the PhD stuff? It can be like anything, even stuff I haven't covered here.
I guess I'm really interested in like the post-bacc experience, but like maybe abroad. So I guess like I'm curious like if you know any resources to find out those opportunities and if they differ at all from the other ones in person.
I actually don't know much about that. I don't know whether you. I imagine some of these like links that I've added that have like long lists of different kinds of programs might have that information. It's a little bit different, but those lists also have some info about whether they're like applicable for international students. So maybe I would look through some of those lists, but unfortunately I don't have that much information about that. Yeah.
Psych jobs and internship opportunities. That WordPress website has lots of stuff from like Australian and Canadian universities.
Okay.
And there's a couple things for non-English speaking institutions, but it's mostly English speaking.
Yeah, I imagine there are opportunities out there. You would probably just have to look around a little bit. Okay. Any other questions? I mean, we can return to this later if anything else comes up. Oh, was there a question? Yeah.
I have a question based on, so let's say you need the training for some of these expectations. How would you ask that? Because I feel like I've seen like the lab coordinator, they expect you to know this stuff instead of like learning. Or like, I don't know. I'm sure.
Yeah, it's tricky. My sense is that usually, do you mean like they said under the like required qualifications?
Yeah.
What kinds of stuff were they asking about? Like really technical skills or like?
I feel like maybe some of this stuff are like more like specific to that their project.
Okay. I think it's still okay to apply and maybe talk to them and say if you are concerned, you can express like what you do know, like and your willingness to learn and all of that. I don't think you should necessarily like not apply just because you think you don't meet those qualifications right now. Because like often people don't have those, like many people don't have those qualifications, and like if they were waiting for that perfect person, like they'd be waiting forever, and it's like you might have other relevant skills that would be really useful to them. So I think it's still totally fine to apply, maybe ask them what the like training opportunities are like, or like how you would like learn those on the job. But I think, I mean, unless it looks like it might be like a slightly more advanced position, like if they're like, you need to have done like 2 years of MRI stuff before you apply, like maybe that's a slightly more like advanced level thing that they're looking for. But I think you guys will see after like looking at many of these, they're usually similar vibe of like, yes, they're looking for like people right out of undergrad, and they generally know that it's like a lot of these things will be new. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, maybe I'll do like a really quick, I don't have that much to say because I'm not out of my PhD either, but basically I just wanted to, we kind of like touched on this at the career panel at the beginning, but like wanted to show that there are many things to think about, like possible things you can definitely do with a PhD, academic or otherwise. I'm not going to go through all the examples, but you can kind of like glance through them. But yeah, academic positions, industry, if you're interested in policy or advocacy, like there's some really cool stuff there, and that's kind of like where my own interests are heading at the moment. There's cool stuff in science communication, outreach. If you're doing a clinical psych PhD, obviously you can do like more clinical therapy focused stuff. But yeah, I guess one thing I will say though is that certain PhD skill sets may better prepare you for certain career options. So like if you wanted to go into like a data science job, like it might help to have more of that like rigorous data analysis experience. So those are things you can think about, like what are the skills you want to develop through like now and during your PhD, if there are any of these like careers that might be of interest to you. Yeah, or like more experience with like outreach or writing or any kinds of like learning about policy. If there's stuff you're really passionate about that you think you could like do, start learning now, I think those can all be really helpful for later on. And also even within academia, there's like a lot of options as well. So you could obviously try to go for a tenure track faculty at like a really like research heavy institution, but you could also be teaching faculty at like a liberal arts college. There's some options to be like a research scientist in someone else's lab if you are not interested in being a PI who's like leading the lab, or more like academic adjacent kind of things like being a grants program officer and helping other people with their research. So basically there's lots out there. So whatever you're like really passionate about, I think you can find something. Any thoughts on like this kind of like array of career options? Cool. Okay, I guess we can do this. I wanted to do kind of like a little bit of like a reflection activity of just, I think something we've been highlighting throughout this weekend is to really try to stay tied to your goals and values. I think in academia, it's really easy to get caught up in like how many papers you've published and like, is that like everything I am? But it's sort of like, those are things that you can't really always control. So much of it is up to luck. But I think it's like, if you just keep like an eye on the things that you really value or like broader goals that you have, that is something you can kind of maintain some autonomy over. And I thought it might be good to kind of have a chance to think a little bit about those things, and then also think about how a PhD would help like you with achieving those things. So maybe we can take like 5 minutes just to think a little bit. I also wanted to highlight that a PhD is not just the research experience, but obviously a lot of that is like the research experience and data analysis, but you just learn so many skills during a PhD that I think like I'm like a completely different person for having done it, and I think that's important, like critical thinking, problem solving, writing skills, managing different projects, teamwork, mentorship, public speaking. All of these, as you can imagine, are going to be relevant in any kind of job that you decide to pursue. So it's not just like you're only doing research and that's the only like narrow thing you're doing. I think you have many opportunities to really like develop all of these skills as a person. Okay, yes, this was the slide I had about like, there's also like just so many communities out there that are going to provide support at all of these academic stages. So like now, while you guys are in college, preparing for graduate school, all throughout graduate school, and even for faculty, that are all dedicated to amplifying and empowering trainees and sharing community stories. I put some up here that are just kind of randomly selected. I don't know a lot about all of them, but I've been like really inspired to see all of these. And there's like so many groups out, like this is a tiny portion of like what's out there. Like this Black in X network, there's like Black in X for like any kind of subfield at this point. Like there's Black in Neuro, there's Black in Psych, there's many just like for any community that you would like to like learn more about their experiences in academia or STEM specifically, like definitely give them a follow. There's like so much like just uplifting of people that it's wonderful to see. And there's also like kind of groups like Spark Society that have formed either like they've been around for a long time or have formed in recent years to really like really actively generate that community and help like share resources, stories. They often will have like opportunities that you can learn about through them, all of that. Have you guys heard about any of these before? A little bit? It's great. Okay. I think this is like close to, yeah, I guess I wanted to do kind of like broader takeaways, which is basically like unsolicited advice, but sort of like tying together some things that I'm sure you guys have heard here and there throughout this weekend from like us before in earlier sessions or from like your individual mentors. But basically the path leading up to and following a PhD is going to look different for everyone. Like success looks different for everyone. Like I was just saying, like I know we can get really caught up in like how many papers we publish or like do we know all the technical skills, but really it's like everyone is on their own individual path. Like each of you have like your own unique set of experiences that no one else has, and it's like that's really important and powerful, especially like Angela said at the beginning, since we're doing like often human research, like that's really important, and I hope that you guys like keep trying to remember that or come back to that. I think we kind of want to basically provide you guys with as much information as possible so that you can make a more informed choice, because like I can say all the advice I want, but ultimately it's a very personal choice. So hopefully this has been just more information for you guys to kind of get thinking about these things. A PhD does have its challenges, things like we've kind of touched on, the difficulty of finding a faculty position. There are definitely pretty broad mental health and imposter syndrome struggles. I mean, that's probably not just a grad school thing, but it's definitely here in grad school. There are going to be still issues with diversity and other institutional problems, hidden curriculum, things like that. So for that reason, that's kind of why we've been sort of talking a lot about getting this additional research and life experience through stuff like a post-bacc or any other kind of like short-term job you guys want to try after college to sort of learn more about what your interests are, because you'll get more experience, learn more about your research interests, and get to talk to more people. And please definitely like talk to as many people as you can and get all of those perspectives. I think that'll be really important. And something I also wanted to emphasize is that like you should never be afraid to ask these, like you should reach out for help. Like I personally always find it really hard to ask because I'm bothering them, like it's gonna get in the way of their work, but like there's so many people out there who really want to help you guys and kind of pay it forward, and I think once you find those people, you should really try to hold on to them. I think there's many such people out there for you guys. And it's not all bad things. Like, of course, there's many like unique positives to doing a PhD. You guys are all here because you already like love science or are really interested in research. You're curious to learn, or you have a career that you think that you're passionate about that you think will require a PhD. And for that reason, like you guys all absolutely belong like here in science, and you can like pursue this path if you would like it. I just want to make sure we're conveying that like it should be like a thoughtful decision because grad school is a long time and it has some of its challenges. But you guys absolutely belong in science. And you'll also develop a lot of transferable skills, and there will be like many different career options afterward for you. And finally, yeah, like we were talking about, my like unsolicited advice is to just try to keep centering your own personal needs, values, and goals through all of this. Like we want you to succeed in whatever way that looks like to you, and I don't know, it's a good way to keep that autonomy like over your own path of like always coming back to like what do you really like want long term, and not try not to get stuck in the kind of like whims of academia that exists. But yeah, sorry, that was my little spiel about that, but is there any thoughts about this or like any general questions?